Interestingly, I started off my career as a nurse and a midwife. I think I wasn't sure what I wanted to study because it was during the time, you know, kind of the time of political unrests in South Africa. And I was raised by a nurse. My mother is a nurse and a midwife. Is that midwife who used to use a bicycle in the village somewhere in Hammanskraal to deliver babies with a suitcase. And I think it's an image that I had kept at the back of my head. You know, certain things that happen in your childhood, you don't realize that they have an influence on you. So I think my mother being a midwife influenced my path in some sense. And then when I went to study, when I started as a nurse, I thought I was whiling away time because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. 3 months into nursing, I remember writing a letter to my parents to say that this is not what I want to do. And I want to come back, you know. And my father say, give it a chance. You can always change career later in life. And then it turns out that at the end of first year, I passed with distinction. And then after the diploma in general nursing, I did midwifery. Personally, I delivered more than 100 in Bushbuck Ridge. But later got to, obviously, as a midwife, I was trained in Western ways of giving birth. In a hospital, I was trained in Western ways of giving birth. But later, when I got pregnant and it was time for me to have babies, the elders in my family then introduced some of the rituals of, you know, kind of taking care of me when I was pregnant, being there for me when I was delivering, and coming after I had delivered babies to do rituals as a way of like connecting this newly arrived soul, you know, to the rest of the cosmos. And I wrote, I was amazed that I wrote about this in my first book, which I published in 2004, that even at that time, somewhere in my consciousness, there was clearly for me a link between what I had been trained as a biomedical midwife with what my ancestors knew about birthing. And after having done all the things that I have done, I find that now I'm going back to midwifery. And I appreciate that indigenous midwifery. And what I find shocking is that our knowledge has been, as far as birthing is concerned, our knowledge is almost wiped out. When we talk about African medicine, traditional healing, a lot of what almost is child. So it's a, you know, to kind of find that I need to run and interview as many wise old women as I can, because also in countries like Botswana and South Africa, where you would think that our leaders would make the environment suitable for our indigenous midwives to practice, they are not allowed, you know. So I think them not being allowed, many of them went underground. They did their work underground, And over time, they have taken the knowledge with them. There's only a few that I'm finding that I'm engaging with. So for me, just to answer your question, the way into the world is the most critical part of our being. And somehow being born in hospital is being born violently, you know? Sociologists talk about a notion that's called epistemic violence. Epistemic violence in a sense that with a suppression of natural birthing, the body's innate knowledge of giving birth is suppressed. The body knows how to give birth to start with. And second, hospital, no, they have mothers who are giving birth. In Namibia and Angola, one of the families that we visited, there are no hospitals, there are no clinics, there are no midwives. So essentially what they do is that elders pass on the knowledge of giving birth to the young ones, that as soon as you reach reproductive age, you witness as many births as possible, so that when your time comes, you have a sense of what's going to happen, you are well prepared, and you have been surrounded by kind of giving birth, and you are better prepared. And we don't have that now. We get pregnant, we are told we have to attend antenatal clinic at the hospital. And from there, you go to birth. Nobody really prepares you, you know, as to what you should expect. And I think the sad thing is that birthing elders made sure that there's other women who are surrounding you in the spirits, them would observing the progress of the labor. And maybe would be one who's supporting you, you know, from the back. So it was not through alone that all women an invasion of body. It's an invasion to our indigenous knowledge as well. You know, unnecessary episiotomies, cutting, unnecessary cesarean sections, because I mean, South Africa, for example, is one of the countries, they say that up to 70% of the births are through Caesar. And more and more and more, we are cutting, you know, we're cutting the abdomen to get the babies out. And there's a reason why birth was meant to be through a birth canal. And so there's a lot of rituals that we're losing in the process.
Wow. This is so informative. Already we're just beginning, but it's so informative. I did lose you a little bit there, so I hope I had all the important aspects of what you were sharing. It's so interesting for me because just last year since I've been on my journey of archiving indigenous knowledge and traditional practices, I've been interviewing the elders just for my personal interest. And so I was talking to my grandmother last year, and she was telling me that all her 5 children, she did natural birthing. Her mother, who's my great-grandmother, was the one who was taking her through that process. And she even showed me the house. She's like, this is where all my children were born. And the same was true for all her 8 sisters, that it was her mother and the other sisters, her aunties, who were helping her with the process. And I found it very interesting. So it seems, but for me, my mother, so in the last 50 years, there has been that transition where now we're doing most of our birthing process in the hospital. And as you were saying, it's been very traumatic. I know personally from my mom's stories, her experience giving birth to my firstborn was quite traumatic for her. She had to be moved to another hospital, and the labor was long. And I think the support is so vital, as you were saying, and having different rituals happening throughout that process. It's so important. And so I'm thinking about, as we're talking about the violence of the current system, to the mother, the experience, the trauma that she experiences when she is in modern hospitals, and she has all the pills in her blood, and there's no support system, no community, no one also explaining to her and calming her down on what's happening. And also on the child, I'm imagining me on day 1 entering this world and entering it in this new town without my grandmother, or with my grandmother, and that's just the 2 of us and the nurses, and it's a very physical process. Just, okay, let's get the baby out, and how that the long-term impact of that process of how we enter the world as babies, and also for mothers, and when they're giving birth, that kind of trauma and how it shifts the mother, and also what do we do with that trauma afterwards, you know?
Yeah. The trauma of childbirth is something that I reflect on quite a lot. Number 1. Number 2, I imagine what it would be like if all African children would be born in a situation where they are received in a manner that reinforces their essence, whether it's through a chant. I was saying that imagine if all the midwives were taught a secret chant, as an example, that the minute a baby is pushed out of the mother's body, the baby is received in a way that kind of strengthens and centers, and also celebrate the fact that there's a soul that has been born, number 1, and also being aware that this soul is connected to the ones that the ones that came before, because our prayers, our invocations in African cosmology connects the unborn, the living, and the departed. So imagine that midwifery is aware of that cycle, so that when we enter the earth realm, we enter into a world that is ready for us, that is accepting of us, that reinforces our identity and our philosophies. Because if someone whispers to you at birth, if you take an example of a naming ceremony, that in terms of naming ceremonies, babies were not named at birth. They were given names mostly after the stump of the umbilical cord has fallen off. or maybe after 3 weeks or 3 months. There were different reasons for that. One reason was to give this baby a chance to decide if it wants to be integrated into the physical come and go. So you don't give it a name until you are sure that it wants to be here. And number two, the other reason was to consult elders and diviners so that they give clarity as to who is this one, you know, who is this one that has been born, so that the name is assigned according to their path, their life path. So in a naming ceremony, the interesting thing is that also a naming ceremony is kind of tied to nature, maybe at sunrise or during full moon. In a naming ceremony, and also it was delayed because there was a need, the mother had to rest. The mother had to be given time to rest. Birth is hectic. And then had alone, and there was a woman who was assigned to take care of her every needs. Our grandmothers knew the beating that our bodies go through when we give birth. And therefore it was important that you need to get adequate bed rest. I was surprised at a later stage when I realized, when I read about the physiology of childbirth and why it's important for you to rest so that the muscles, all the muscles into the original, you know, kind of the original being. So if you take an example of naming ceremony, as I have been mentioning, is that your paternal grandmother is the one who takes you as a baby outside of the birthing heart, and you are passed on to your father. By that time, your father has already been given your name, and your father is the one who begins to speak to you first, you know, kind of, you engage with your father, and that's part of the socialization. Now think about the fact that a lot of Black families are female-headed, meaning that the father is absent in the conditioning of the child. You are already disadvantaged at that level, and you are therefore disconnected to your paternal lineage, to your ancestors. There are no elders who helped you to be rooted in your ancestors. So already you have like issues of identity there. And what would happen then is that, you know, the elders are the ones who will do a ritual of introducing this soul. Maybe it would be the old person that you are named after, you know, back to earth. And what happens now is that you go to hospital, you give birth, immediately nurses want your name. You have to be registered with Home Affairs, you know, because you need to get a child grant. And the father is not there. And maybe you even had a cesarean house where you are alone in a shack or in a flat. In an apartment, you are alone, there's no one to take care of you. You are nursing the wound, rooted. You know, the soul that has not been helped to be centered. And then you wonder why we have a high prevalence of postnatal depression. Because new mothers are alone. They have no support. And in certain instances, they even have to return to work early, because if they stay longer, there's a high likelihood of losing a job. So there are all those pressures that we are dealing with, which are a bit scary, you know, for us as a people. We are unrooted. We've got no roots. But then if you take also the rituals around disposal of the placenta, you know, there's different ways in which the placenta was disposed. The one that we know most is the placenta being buried. You know, there would be a place, maybe your in-laws would identify a specific place in the yard where the placenta has to be buried. In some people, in the case where people were not as nomadic as we were now, there could be a site in the burial site where your placenta is buried. And the understanding was the day you pass on, you were going to be buried as the same place where your placenta, where the stump has been buried.
Wow.
So that's secular way of life. But now we can't do those things. Admittedly, we can't do those things anymore because we have to go to Johannesburg and Cape Town and wherever and look for jobs. You know, we don't even have land, you know. When you live in an apartment, where do you bury your placenta? How do you dispose the stump of the umbilical cord? Where do you become rooted? The umbilical cord was more a celebration of fertility, and it was tied to fertility of the land. That, I mean, the rituals of, you know, in September when we celebrate the new year and we are preparing for new planting season and blessing the seeds and all of that. When the diviners and the healers do their prayers about, you know, praying for rain and thanking the gods for the land and asking for fertility of the land, they also ask for fertility of the wombs. And the fertility of the woman's body is tied to the fertility of the land. Just because we depended on agriculture, we didn't depend on checkers or pick and pay. You know, we depended on the land. So there's kind of all those things that we have lost. That kind of reveals the source of our mental illness. You know, for me, that disconnection is a revelation of why we are mentally ill, because we are not rooted anywhere.
Yes, that is what's also coming up for me. As you were talking, I'm realizing some of our core wounds, or especially the core existential wounds, are cemented by our current birthing process. So the first core existential wound being when we left the divine realm and came here, and just losing that connection, at least at a physical level, with the divine and coming to this planet. And we carry this wound, of course. And so you can imagine how now, if the way that we're introduced, we're not having the support of our ancestors, our guides, or at least that ritual is no longer facilitated to make this abandonment wound so much better, to cushion it, you know, for the hole that is happening in. And when you're talking about how there's not even enough time for the baby to be grounded, to bond with the mom immediately after they want all this exhaust, many things for the baby, and the baby's already been named immediately, and we're not allowing the baby to enter the new state of being that is the physical realm, and to also get grounded. And so this is why we have issues of abandonment wounds and belonging and feeling grounded in the physical body, because there was never that from the very beginning. It's like rush. And so all this later
Yeah.
in my work as a psycho-spiritual healer, these are the main wounds that I can see coming up. Abandonment. I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel like I know my family. I don't feel connected to my ancestors. And it's like, it's been from day one. We can go all the way back to day one of our first day on this planet. And it is heartbreaking. And when you talk about the womb, which is a source of creation, it is a center for creating life and creating dreams and community and so on. So how many wombs are grieving right now because they were never given time to heal? They were not allowed to bring new life in a more conducive state. It really puts a lot of things into perspective around why it feels like there's a lot of mental well-being issues for this generation, or at least it's coming up more. It's because also there's been that disconnection in the past 50 years as people, African people.
Right. What I'm finding interesting in my research is that the home births are re-emerging, but in developed countries, like for instance, a country like Holland or Sweden or Switzerland are said to have the lowest maternal mortality rate, meaning that birth is safer there as compared to us. But they are going back and giving birth at home, in the safety of the home, supported by midwives. But for us, healthcare is a business. So, those who are running the business are pushing the message that they're already defining pregnancy as a medical condition. So pregnancy is a medical condition, and you need to be in hospital, you need doctors. I remember with my third child, I only went to see a doctor once. I think I was about 3 months pregnant. And just testing my urine and taking my blood pressure. And I decided, no thanks, I'm not coming back. And that was the end of me going to a doctor for antenatal care. And of course, I had an advantage because I was trained as a midwife. I knew what to do. But later on, then I had to identify a midwife that I worked with so that we can prepare for the birth. But also I had my mother, as I said, who was trained as a midwife. But there was another old woman from Limpopo who was also there, and we also use herbs. So it was a different experience for me, that I was surrounded by elders and they did the rituals. By that time, we didn't use the pampers. We used these white nappies. And then the nappies could be washed in herbs. The first nappies could be washed in herbs mixed with milk, as a way of also grounding the baby. And the older women also taught you about breastfeeding, especially the importance of breastfeeding within the first hour of birth, because this is the time when you have this fluid, this yellowish fluid coming out of the breast, which is called colostrum. And colostrum has got a high concentration of antibodies, as an example, that a baby who manages to suck colostrum very early after birth has got a greater chance of developing her own strong immune system. And of course, now we have issues like HIV that impacts on all of that. You know, there's so many other complications that are getting in the way. We can't practice healthy birthing and early child care in the way that we used to do, because there's a whole lot of other modern life complications that are keeping us captive. So, but also to say, because I'm doing now my, I'm doing my PhD on Indigenous midwifery. I'm also finding that Indigenous midwifery is also re-emerging with Indigenous people all over the world. You know, Canada, as an example, New Zealand, Maori elders are organizing themselves to teach about Indigenous birthing. Countries in Latin America, you know, like Mexico and Guatemala, that a lot of that is coming out. When in Africa, because Africa has been heavily colonized, the narrative is still based on colonial medicine. That says that Indigenous midwifery is detrimental to the child, and it's taken as a harmful practice. Of course, there's harmful practices both in Western and Indigenous midwifery. You have harmful practices in Western midwifery, and you have harmful practices in Indigenous midwifery. But it does not mean that Indigenous midwifery by its own is harmful. But the narrative that we are being sold is that it is harmful. And it's interesting that, you know, in Africa, where we had a wealth of knowledge around birthing, that is almost wiped out. And the narrative is, safe birth in hospital, that home births are dangerous. So it's basically around the politics of birthing as well, you know? It's more around the politics of birthing. And I think it's a topic that has to come out more and more, that we need to have more activism around the politics of birthing in Africa. Yeah.
Wow. I'm interested to know more about this politics of birthing that are currently happening from your perspective, that are influencing why a lot of people will prefer the Western birthing process as compared to the Indigenous process, because it does feel like the Indigenous birthing method is coming up on social media. We're seeing a lot of people reclaiming that and returning back to that, and because now a lot of people are understanding the connections and how deeper they go, and when we balance out the Indigenous, it's better to return to the Indigenous ways because they are more conducive for the baby and more conducive for the mother. But I still think that it will help for us to actually notice why is it that we have these ideologies. What has happened that has gotten us to believe it's better with Westernized as compared to Indigenous?
I think the answer is just simple. It's it's because of colonization. Everything else that is Western is superior. It's the best, you know. A simple phrase, it applies in everything, even in birthing. We don't believe in ourselves. We don't believe in our way of being, our way of doing. Education reinforces that, the self-hate and the disconnection from our identity. And I always say that apartheid in all its forms, and I'm not meaning apartheid just in South Africa, I mean globally, it is a very profitable business you know, for people, for the 5% that is said to be ruling the world. So the more we believe less in ourselves, the more profitable it is, you know, for business. And the more we become mentally unbalanced, also still the more profitable it is, you know, for people who rule the world. And the world is not ruled by governments, by the way, you know. We vote for political parties, but political parties and governments don't rule the world. So it's almost like an illusion. We are caught in this illusion that we have to believe that political give us freedom. If that was the case, political parties in Africa would be concerned with the disconnection from our identity. And that would have been one of the things that they would put as number one in education, religion, medicine, and so on. But also because we have been colonized. As Kian Pahlele says, by virtue of having been colonized, we have split personalities. The reality is that we don't have one personality. We have a lot of splits. I mean, if you think of the fact that a young woman was saying to me in a meeting in Cape Town yesterday that she thinks that she has a calling, she gets messages from her grandparents, but that she's not able to listen because of the conditioning within a religion that says that, you know, kimadimoni. So that's an example of the splits, you know, the splits that we have. And so because we have split personalities going forward, and this is what my work is moving to at this point, I'm exploring ways in which we could collaborate between two systems. For instance, in terms of birthing, my question is it possible for biomedical midwives to collaborate with Indigenous midwifery? But what is very important is the woman's agency to say, I want to give birth at home, as an example. And then the system supports her decision. It ensures that she gives birth at home and she's supported. Or you give birth in hospital and you say to them, I want to take my placenta home, you know? So there's different forms of collaboration so that you can give birth in hospital but be able to demand your placenta and take it home so that you can go home and do the rituals. And giving birth and say no, and when the nurses ask you that what is the baby's name, you explain that no, we don't have a name yet. And this is the reason why we don't have that. So I think going forward, we'll have to explore ways in which the two splits can collaborate. Because at this point, there isn't, I don't think that you could be exclusive in saying this and not that. We are at the point where we can explore the marriage between the two.
Yes, I deeply resonate with it. Before I continue, everyone, please feel free to start sending in your Q&A, your questions, so that we may jump into that after this. I was saying that I resonate so much with this because for me, I have been born, and I think for everyone, we are born in a colonized world, and that is the thinking in our consciousness. It is already here, and so there is that need to accept that we are here. This has been our experiences. This is how it has deeply influenced who we are, and then we can return back to the practices, the rituals, the ceremonies, the ideologies that we feel must come back and marry the two, as you're saying. And this has been true for me also in my work. I have a background in psychology, and being a traditional healer, Sangoma, and marrying the two. In the beginning, it felt like it would be difficult, or that shouldn't exist. But I found that we actually need to bring the two together. We need different systems coming together so that we are modern people with modern problems, as you were saying. And some of those modern problems can be perceived with modern ideology or the westernized ideology. And then we bring in our traditional and indigenous systems, our technologies to tomorrow we're actually talking about it, the practical ways to decolonize as a colonized person in a colonized world. But yes, the idea of if I'm at the hospital and I can call in my midwife and still be with the nurses from the hospital, my grandmother and the mother and my mother to come and be with me and be allowed to do whatever ceremonies I want. That would be so profound, and that would shift so much in terms of the experiences of the women who are going through this. Yes.
Yeah. But also, for that to happen, the architecture of the hospital has to change. Right now, birthing spaces are open. You are divided by just screens. There is no privacy. You know, imagine imagine a hospital with rondavels as birthing spaces. You know, or round rooms, or a birthing space next door to it. There's a space for families, for your grandmother to come and be with you. And when they get tired, they have a little bed where they can lie down. But then when things are really bad, she's the one who will come and hold your hand and invoke your spirits, your ancestors, you know. So I think for that to happen, we need to change the architecture of the hospitals, you know, structured at this point, especially labor wards in public hospitals. It's very disrespectful to birthing. Yeah, and traumatizing. Yes. Yeah.
So many women, before they even they give birth, they are already experiencing the trauma of their neighboring other mothers who are giving birth. And I can just imagine what that does to someone, you know, experiencing that before you even begin. And I've had many of my friends sharing their experiences, and that stays with you, and there's no counseling after that, no support, psycho-emotional support after that, which is
and also there's a lot of you know, what they call obstetric violence happening in hospitals. Physical violence, psychological violence. That's also my area of work. That when we talk about gender violence, but we never talk about violence against women who are giving birth. It's a lot. That's what being a woman is about. So you carry this wound in your system for the rest of life. And to be able to deal with it, you tell yourself that it's all about being a woman, and it's related to how when you got married as a young bride as well. Those are some of the things, you know, that you were told, a real woman has to persevere. And the injuries are not only from men in our lives. The injuries are from the system as well. So we persevere for all kinds of trauma from individuals and the systems and institutions, and we embody that we embody the trauma as women throughout. And therefore, when we talk about healing, we should find a way of healing those kind of wounds as well.
Why does the archetype of violent midwife actually exist? Because it's common all across Africa, where a lot of women do share stories of the nurses and the midwives being very emotionally, psychologically, and physically abusive. Why does that exist beyond colonization and us being told that yes, you have to go through pain? But what is there anything else beyond that? Just from your
is it not related to what we spoke about earlier about birth in itself, being traumatic, and that if it happens outside of the context of your culture and tradition, which is very supportive, then you know what they say, that hurt people hurt others. So we were wounded. You were talking about core wound, and then how many of us carry that core wound throughout, even before colonization. Carry that core wound, and there's never a place where that is addressed, spoken about, healed. Of course, then you are going to inadvertently pass it on. If you find yourself in a position of power over other people, it's much easier for you to pass on that to others, because it's a trauma that you are carrying inside of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. This is part of why I do what I do, because I think that there is not much awareness of how deep, how complex and interrelated a lot of our experiences, a lot of our systems are connected with this core wounds, with consciousness itself. So sometimes we say politics or education, but they're also interconnected. It's not one singular problem. There are just a lot of problems existing, consciousness problems, our disconnection with spirit, our disconnection with this ancient truth and wisdom that we lost along the ways as well. So we cannot begin to truly heal if we don't see and we don't put everything in the table to see what else is happening. Yes.
Right. Yeah. It is a challenge that we are facing. I think in our evolution as the human species, there is much more of a call to return to our ancient wisdom. But having said that, I don't want us to romanticize ancient wisdom as being free from harm. There is some part of our ancient knowledge which is harmful, and therefore, we approach it with an enlightened view, of the world. We embrace it, but at the same time, if you take an example of rituals during pregnancy, what happens to a woman who can't give birth? As an example. So that woman is scorned, is called names, is ridiculed. Okay? Think of all the names that are used to refer to a woman who can have babies. It's another form of abuse, that such a woman goes through. So celebrating fertility is great, but then what happens to a woman who can't give birth? Does it mean that if you cannot give birth, is there no other kind of fertility in your being that cannot be celebrated? As much as we kind of uphold the notion of motherhood, it's also another label that is used to abuse other women. especially the women who can't give birth. And, it is therefore important for us to look at the two sides of the coin. Some rituals are great, but if you flip them, you find that they are harmful to other women or other people.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Hence this marriage of the ancient wisdom and also our modern experiences, where we are in the modern times, in terms of consciousness, in terms of what we know we need as human beings right now, and how we are now expanding what motherhood means, what giving birth means, and how it has to look for it to be safe for us, for it to be expansive for us, for it to be grounded and healing for us. So there's definitely a need to always constantly be saying there are some ancient technologies that served a specific purpose and they need to come back. And then there are others that we need to let go of and adjust and so forth. Yeah, that is beautiful.
Or alternatively, some ancient rituals can be repackaged.
Yes.
As long as we understand their symbolism. We don't have to do the exact same things that were done then. But we can repackage them in such a way that they meet the original purpose. So that's also another thing. I don't want to imagine my ancestors being stuck in one place and doing the same thing, forever.
Yeah.
I want to also imagine my ancestors also evolving, being part of the broader human race evolution. So I think sometimes I feel that we hold on to things rigidly because this was how it was done, instead of asking the question, why was it done this way? What was it meant to serve? When we understand that, we're able to transform it. Yeah, I missed you a bit there.
Oh, yeah.
My internet is starting to give me some problems here.
Yes. Yeah, I think the last part we heard was we're able to transform it once we have it. Yes. I definitely agree with that, because I think also when we are looking at these ancient technologies and wisdoms and rituals that were done, we must take into considerations that some of them looked the way that they looked because of resources and what was accessible for our ancestors at that time, and how now things have changed. We have access to more resources. Currently, we're able to build more. We're able to, for example, what is happening right now here, this would have been impossible in olden times, right? To be in conversation with someone in another country and everyone is able to listen, right? So if we restricted ourselves and say, no, we cannot have online summits on sacred wisdom because that's not how our ancestors did it, then we were missing out on the whole point of why we do what we do and why wisdom exists, which is essentially to allow many people to access it and to change their lives with it. Yes.
Yeah.
So let me jump to the questions. Actually, there's one related to what we're talking about in terms of rituals. So Noziko is asking if you may please elaborate more on the rituals that were performed before, during, and after the indigenous birthing process? Perhaps on those that you didn't mention.
There were rituals, for instance, let's take an example of rituals done or ceremonies. You know, sometimes I think the appropriate word is a ceremony rather than a ritual. Ceremonies that were done when you are pregnant. When you are 3 months pregnant, actually you report pregnancy after you have missed about three menses, you know, 3 months of menstruation. And then there was a process in which you can do that. Obviously, there's differences in terms of communities. You would speak to, you know, your sister-in-law, the young Rakadi, you know. The young Rakadi would be the first one that you tell, and then she would notify your mother-in-law if you are married. And a ceremony was done. The mother-in-law would be the one to tell the father-in-law. And a ceremony of Hoyakole, you know, Lechwama is our indigenous church, that each family had Lechwama where they went to when they went to report something to their ancestors. So they would go to Lechwama to report that about the pregnancy. And then the next step would be to tell your family, you know, someone, Borakhadi and other people in the family, especially the ones who were there, you know, who was there, would be the ones who would then be sent, you know, to tell your family about the fact that you are expectant. And again, when you go to your family, there would be gifts, you know. Every time when these announcements were made, there's always gifts. The one who's going to this family is carrying gifts. It could be like a white chicken. At the time when people were still you know, could afford it, maybe it can be a goat. It could be a male goat and a female goat. And the reason about this is that, I mean, it's a form of economy. I see it as a form of wealth distribution. That when they bring a male and a female goat, it's sharing wealth. Because, you know, the cows were for the men and the goats were for the women. And then obviously it means my own mother is going to be receiving a male goat and a female goat. It means that it's increasing. It's increasing the number of her goats. But the male goat might be slaughtered, you know, for the ceremony. But the female goat is kept to increase the number of goats, because obviously you'll find that your mother already has a male goat against her, you know, her head of goats. And then the next would be when you are ready to go when you're ready to give birth, maybe in the last trimester of your pregnancy. That's where you would be taken, especially if it's your first child, that's where you would be taken to your mother, because it was believed that your mother is the one who understands your lineage better. And your first experience of giving birth should be, you know, in the company of your mother. But then look at it this way. Right now, sisters-in-laws are fighting, as an example. And my husband is in Botswana. I'm in South Africa. So how do we do those ceremonies and the announcements? And maybe I'm fighting with my mother-in-law, or I don't even, I don't have a relationship that there's a need to heal the mother wound. So there's there. And when you are pregnant for the first time and you are carrying a mother wound, you and your mother are fighting, you know, then it's a problem. And now I see on the screen, Letogonole is asking about children who are born out of wedlock. There's that as well. Systems are different. Systems are different. Is the father there? Is the father participating? Is the father agreeing that I want to be the, you know, the father to this child? And it does not matter, you know, whether the child is born within the marriage or not. Obviously, the complication is when the father is not there. When the father is not there, maybe your uncle or your brothers could be the one, you know, who your brothers as umalume by the child could be the one that who holds the space for you during the ceremony. So you could identify male relatives, you know, who could do that for you. There's a whole lot of many ceremonies and rituals that are done. For instance, when you are in the 3rd trimester, there are special herbs that were prepared by the elders, and the main reason of the herbs is to relax, to begin to help to expand the pelvic, you know, the pelvic cavity in preparation for the birth. So those herbs as well is also some of the things, some of them are kind of medication that you start taking in the 3rd trimester to prep. So I mean, it's a whole long list of ceremonies and rituals, and it depends on what stage of the pregnancy you are. When you you know, when you have when you are pregnant, there's a way that the pregnancy is both to your in-laws and your family. And when you give birth, there's also another process. And the last ritual actually is, the last birthing ritual is done once your baby has got the first teeth, which I find very interesting, that meaning that when do babies have their first teeth? 6 months or 7 months? And I was doing an online course on a postpartum online course, and I was fascinated to hear about indigenous people in Latin America talking about the 4th trimester, and that there's on the 4th trimester. We only talk about 3 trimesters, and the 4th trimester is also very critical and important, and there's actually needs a lot of support. So yeah, so as I say, there's a whole lot, and it depends on the phase of the pregnancy where you are at.
And the 4th trimester, is it 3 months or 6 months after the baby has been born?
Some say 6, some say 9.
Okay.
Yeah, that by 9 months, there's a difference. Some say 3 months, some say 6, some say 9 months. But essentially, one could, when do babies start sleeping through the night? You know? Because the first year is hectic. The first year, mothers literally survive on sleeplessness. And without the support, you know, then it becomes quite difficult, you know, for you to do the mothering on your own. And society is structured in such a way that mothers raise babies on their own. And we suffer the consequences. And there's pressure at work. There's pressure at work as well, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
And just talk about how, like, single mothers later on in African spirituality, the relationship with our paternal ancestry becomes a big issue as well, because we didn't do the ceremonies in the first place, or we didn't explore them and find out and map from the very beginning. Even if there was even if there's no relationship with the father, at least if those conversations were had, it could help a lot of people who later on they do have a problem with the surname or the problem with their paternal ancestors. Because I see here Rikodolo is asking about a child who's born out of wedlock, and then she's named after her paternal grandmother, but she's never been introduced to the ways. I'm not sure if I understand this.
Yeah. I am of the opinion that we have the capacity to speak to ancestors, or maybe the family of the father, non-physically.
Yes.
That you as a mother can devise ceremonies, you know, of you know, talking to the ancestors of the father's side. But I liked what you said also earlier, that we should also not just depend on men and fathers, you know, to communicate with the other world. There's a village in Kenya which I want to visit. I heard about it. It's called Umoja. It's a women's village.
Wow.
You know, and I thought, wow, I'd like to visit it and see how they manage all these ceremonies. And I think they rely a lot on the power of the feminine. Because that's why Harapasabadimo Rakadi is the one who opens the way. So Rakadi is the paternal aunt, and the Rakadi is a woman. So the woman in a sense is a gatekeeper.
Yeah.
But there's a way in which we have been taught to be disconnected to our power or undermine our power. And obviously, patriarchy came with colonization, and we have deferred our power to men, even in situations where we can practically run the world. So I'd like to believe that in a community where women work together, there's always ways in which we can circumvent you know, these barriers. We can rewrite the rules. We can break them and rewrite them, and find a way of being connected to the other world in our own way, you know?
Yes, because the spirit realm evolves as we evolve, as we were talking earlier, that all this is not out of pure neglect. It's also because of the experiences, our history that has made us be who we are, and we cannot want to just have the ancient ways be stuck in the same model when we have also went through so many changes ourselves.
Yeah, so, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
The Asians catch up with us. They do. They're just like, yeah, okay, where do you want us? They come.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
So, Nomasonto has a question. She's saying this is a very insightful session. So she would like to know, now that she's aware, all of us were aware of the reasons behind all our birthing ceremonies and rituals, what can we do now to heal all these traumas as a way to help the next generation to have different experiences within this very same system? Beyond changing the landscapes of hospitals, what else can we do?
I am a firm believer that the healer is always within.
Yeah.
That the minute you begin to ask the question, the answer is there already. And the answer does not necessarily have to come from the next person. And that we all have an innate knowledge. And depending on how, I don't know if she has has her own personal ceremonies of communicating with the spirit world, you know. And that's something that she can start, noticing, whether it's through meditation and perhaps even keeping a journal around it. Asking the questions and meditating or creating her own rituals and see what comes out of her being. The answers are there. I'm very reluctant to kind of say people should go to this person or to that place, because it's also doing the same thing of silencing our innate knowledge as individuals. But maybe also what she can do is start running, kind of running groups with women and exploring the question wherever they are. Exploring the questions, they will be amazed at what comes out, and the healing will start there.
Yes. I love this. What I have been appreciating quite deeply is, I don't know if you're still there. It seems, I think we might have lost Mmatshilo. Hoping she visits us here. But what I love, and
you went off.
Yes, it froze for a moment there. Okay, yes. I was saying that what I have been really grateful for in the past, this whole summit, what has been coming up with every speaker is activating our own inner healer, our own inner wisdom, connecting directly with the spirit, and showing that we have that power that has always been available for each one of us. That is the fastest and honestly truest way of our healing that we need to start practicing. We can get support, yes, when we need support, when we want to learn, we want to activate that inner wisdom. But as long as we are aware that it is already within us and nothing is ever lost, this ancient birthing technologies are available, and we can retrieve them from our guides from up above, and from reading, of course, in these conversations, but nothing is ever lost.
Right.
Love that.
Okay. I see. Do we still have questions? I'm looking at the time. I have another appointment somewhere at 8.
Oh, yes. We have only one question. It's still around trauma from Letlokonolo, and so then we'll be able to wrap up. It's essentially about rituals after history. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this well. Hysterectomy, yes. And
rituals,
yes, and essentially,
that's
after other traumatic birth experiences. Did we have, or do we have rituals, ceremonies for those experiences?
I haven't come across rituals like dealing with healing after hysterectomy, but more and more young women are going through hysterectomies at the moment.
And maybe explain what it is?
The removal of the uterus, of the womb.
Okay.
Yeah. And then it means that it's something that we need to, we need to come up with rituals. We need to come up with rituals. And rituals, for me, rituals that are related to birthing in a womb are best done around water. So we can devise a ritual where when you lose it, when the uterus is taken away from you, in the same way as when you have breast cancer and your breasts have to be removed, women who lose their breasts have to go through psychological healing that kind of centers their womanhood away from the breast. That even if they don't have the breast, it does not make them less of women. That a woman who has gone through a hysterectomy goes through rituals that helps to center them. You know, that hysterectomy is an organ. It's a bodily organ. It's one small part of who I am, and it does not define who I am as a woman. And if I'm no longer giving birth physically, there's a whole lot of other things that I can give birth to. So birthing is not just physical, birthing is also mental. We mother so many processes. So it's important to expand birthing and motherhood beyond the physical, that women also give birth physically to many things. So when an organ that is similar on the verb elo, it does not mean that you can no longer boba, you know. You can boba, you can create other things in so many ways. You can give birth to so many other processes. So it's important, you know, for us to expand beyond that. Yeah, beyond the physical birth. For instance, there are women who don't want to give birth. They don't want children. No. You know, I think those are some of the things that for us in contemporary Africa and the world, these are topics that we need to start talking about more and more. Yeah.
Yes, this is so important. This has been, Letokonolo is thanking you so much for this insightful session. And this for me has also been a powerful lesson for me, very expansive, and it makes me think even more about many aspects of our lives as women, as womb bearers and creators of dreams, of babies, of life, of projects. Community. Yes. It makes us appreciate what and who we are as African people, African women, and there's definitely a need to reclaim and integrate with our modern times all that you have shared with us. Definitely.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
This was so powerful. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow. Again, we continue 3 more days to go. Okay. Love and blessings, and have a good night. Yeah. Okay.